But the Devil's Teeth is called the Devil's Teeth. I think a lot of people think, oh, maybe it's referring to the sharks. It's not. It's a little bit of a double entendre, but it's also ironic because I wanted this book to be the anti-Jaws. I wanted to really make people understand that white sharks were not this demonic killing machine. The reason it's called Devil's Teeth is because sailors in the 18th and 17th centuries referred to these islands as the Devil's Teeth because they just look like fangs kind of jutting out of the ocean. And I don't know if you can see it, but there's a lighthouse on the top peak there, and that lighthouse was the first lighthouse on the west coast of the U.S. But before it was there, they used to run into these islands, and so they were really scared of them, and they didn't like them, and that's why they were known as the Devil's Teeth.
And these islands are the Farallon Islands that are
Yes.
located off San Francisco, and cold water, very rough ocean. And give us a little bit of the history, because it's got quite a fascinating history.
This is the weirdest place. There's a very weird place in the wave, but this is a weird, interesting place. It's 27 miles due west of San Francisco, and it's technically within metropolitan San Francisco city limits, but you could be on another planet. And so when I saw the documentary, which was actually made here by filmmakers from Oahu, Grace and Paul Atkins, for the BBC, I kind of didn't see the beginning of it, and I didn't realize this was California, and I just assumed it was somewhere in the Southern Ocean. And it is actually a stone's throw away from Macy's in Union Square. But at the time I worked at Outside Magazine, and that was kind of what we specialized in, was let's find these crazy places, and we were very interested in the wildest elements, and this qualifies, and nobody had heard of it at a story meeting that we had. And then shortly after that, I couldn't stop thinking about it, because it was the only time I'd ever seen great white sharks in North America. And not only that, in this one shot, there were like 6 of them circling around this boat. And I did not think this was a pack animal. And I didn't think anybody else did either. So clearly some really interesting science was being done here. It's a very desolate place, despite its proximity, because you can't get onto it unless you're hoisted up by crane, and you can't go there for about 18 different reasons that the federal government has put out forth, including that one of the biggest nuclear waste dumps in the world is right in this vicinity, but also because there are about 300,000 nesting seabirds on this little island, and it's just simply too fragile for there to be a lot of human interaction with the wildlife. But the history of it is, the more I found out about it, my research continued on it, and my obsession with it continued after I went to Time. I was at Time Inc., and I was editor-at-large on a number of magazines, and one of them was Time. And I was asked what I wanted to write about, and I said, that. So we started researching it, and really nothing much had been written. So that really intrigued me, because there's very little about which not much has been written these days. So I sort of found out the hard way why not much was written about this place. And the book gets into that, but the whole human history, there used to be a town on these islands, there was a war, there were murders, you just couldn't make it up, which is the best thing about nonfiction, is the stories are really true, and you couldn't make them up, they're too weird.
Well, I don't know about most of you, but just seeing that would be enough for me to turn the boat around. And then just seeing that
it's a boat graveyard there.
And seeing that that's how you got to get on the island, I would definitely turn around, especially on a day like this one when it doesn't work.
That's the boat launching. There's actually a little harness. They launch a 11-foot Boston whaler into the water, and they go right up to the sharks when they're feeding. And what's so unusual about the setup here is it's an island with a lighthouse. It's a circular island, 65 acres, very steep. It has this lighthouse, and all these birds, and all these sharks, and all these seals. And what is great about that combination is that, so the seals, the elephant seals, come off the land, and the sharks are within very close proximity to the shore, like 100 yards maybe. And they attack these seals, and the way they attack them is they come up from below, because the water is really deep here and drops off. There's a shelf. The island is volcanic. It's actually the edge of the continental shelf, this particular. It's on a different tectonic plate than the rest of California. It looks like it. The sharks rush up, they behead the seals. I never saw a seal in a kill that had any of its head left. And the seals, because they stay underwater so long, have this super brilliant red blood. And you can see it on the cover of the book. That's a real blood stain. It's this weird orangey fire engine color. And then the birds go crazy. And so the scientists up at the lighthouse can see the birds go crazy. They can see the blood spot. And then they run down and they launch their boat off here, and they go right out to the shark. And because the elephant seals float, the sharks are eating on the surface of the water, and they're just kind of eating. And you can go right up to them. They pay no attention. They'll look at you like whales. They'll spy hop you like whales. And so using this very unusual confluence of wildlife, they were able to find out things about white sharks that nobody had ever discovered before.
The next slide comes with a little bit of a preface, given that tomorrow we all have to get back in the ocean. She's talked about these great beasts, but I didn't want to freak anyone out too much, so I hope you'll forgive me a little liberty. I found this slide. It was the friendliest great white I could find on the internet. It's not the one that Susan gazed into the eyes of.
No, they are really, this looks like the Joker in Batman. They're so wonderful, and people are like, I'm scared to read your book. And I think actually the book will make you fear sharks less. I got to see how thoughtful and curious they are. I mean, they're very good hunters, and when they're hunting, they mean business, and you don't survive as long as they have survived without being very good at what you do. But most of the time, they're kind of checking things out very carefully. I have encountered lots of other sharks, and I lived in Maui while I was riding the wave, and I still think of Maui as my home, and I, as an open water swimmer, have run into tiger sharks before, and I would rather take my chances with a white shark any day. Tiger shark just kind of, I love all sharks, but tiger shark kind of is a junkyard dog, and this is a little bit more like a sort of a majestic, different. They're just different. These are warm-blooded. White sharks are warm-blooded, which is unusual. And because they're so big, they're as wide. They almost look like orcas because they're so wide, and that's also unusual. They can't afford to attack this and that. They have to be very laser focused in terms of what they go for, because to take their 2,000-pound body at 40 miles an hour, upwards, there's a huge expenditure of calories for them. So if they were to eat us, their process would be a net negative one for calories, and they would die out. Whereas by contrast, they're one of the most successfully evolved animals on the planet. Sharks are older than trees on the earth. If you go back, as far as sharks go back, it's 400 million years, twice as old as dinosaurs. They made it through every global mass extinction, except arguably, the one that's in process right now, right? The sixth, which is really us. And they are evolved for everything else. They squeaked through the Permian, where 90% of all life just was snuffed out, they think because all the oxygen got taken from the planet. They're very selective, and I don't think that white sharks just go around snapping at anything. The ones that do tend to be the juveniles. When a surfboard is taken to be a seal, it's generally not the bigger, more successful, older sharks. They have learned that that's not a seal. But the juveniles can be 13 or 14 feet long, so that's an animal that can do some damage, and they usually take a bite, realize it's not a seal, leave, and don't come back. When surfboards were used at the Farallones, they never had a return bite on a surfboard. The problem is that investigatory bite can, hit the femoral artery. But it's not like they don't have hands. They have to figure out what's going on, so unfortunately they do have teeth.